It was midday, October 5th, 2019, a quiet afternoon in the small village of Kodathai, Kerala. The sun hung lazy above the coconut trees, and the life was, as usual, peaceful. But that peace was about to break. Within minutes, police jeep rolled into the narrow village lanes. Officers stepped out, serious and alert. Neighbors peered through their windows, confused and whispering, saying, "What's happening?" And then they saw her, a simple, quiet woman stepping out of her home, dressed neatly in a plain chudidar, face calm, eyes steady, and her name Jolly Jospeh. To everyone who knew her, she was polite, religious, soft spoken, a woman who smiled often and never raised a voice. So when police handcuffed her and took her away, the entire neighborhood froze in disbelief, saying, "Why Jolly?" Someone murmured, "She's a good woman. What could she have done?" And by evening, disbelief has turned to shock. Across every Malayalam news channel, one headline screamed louder than the rest. Housewife arrested in Kerala, accused of killing six family members using cyanide. Yes, using cyanide. The woman once seen as kind and caring was now being called a monster in disguise. But what came next was even more shocking because Jolly Jospeh wasn't just a wife, wasn't just a mother. She was a master in manipulation, she was a skilled deceiver, and perhaps one of the most cold blooded female killers the world has ever seen. Let's first understand the perfect daughter in law. Before the cyanide, there was just Jolly, a woman everyone in Kodathai trusted. Jolly was born in Idukki. She grew up like many others, such as ordinary, polite, with quiet ambition. Her smile was always disarming, her tone was respectful. To most, she was a kind of woman any family would be proud to bring as a daughter in law. When she married Roy Thomas, the youngest son of Tom and Anama Thomas, she entered one of the most respected families in the area, the Ponnamattam household. They were known for their strong faith, financial stability, and generosity. Jolly's new home was a large ancestral house surrounded by coconut trees. Inside, the air always smelled of incense and fresh coffee. Life was peaceful, predictable, and almost idyllic. But even in those early days, Jolly was different. She wasn't content being just a homemaker. She wanted admiration, respect, and total control. To the world, she built an image of perfection. She attended church regularly, helped with local charities, and spoke softly to elders. She always smiled often, maybe way too often. Her neighbors described her as kind and cultured. But behind that smile, there was another Jolly, one who wanted more status, more money, and more attention. Her husband Roy worked abroad for some time, but their marriage wasn't as happy as it looked. Roy was carefree, at times irresponsible, while Jolly was ambitious, controlling, and obsessed with appearance. So usually cracks starts to show. Quiet argument, jealousy, and power struggle. To compensate, Jolly began to weave a new identity for herself. She told neighbors and relatives that she worked as a lecturer at the National Institute of Technology, Calicut, a prestigious position. that immediately elevated her image. She even forged certificates and ID cards to make the lie believable. No one questioned her. Why would they? She was educated, religious, and polite, the so called perfect daughter in law. Inside the inside the Ponnamattam home, she slowly took control. She started managing finances, arranged family functions, and made every decision look like it came from unity and care. But in reality, she was subtly isolating everyone, turning family members against each other, whispering small doubts, and creating invisible walls. The mask was flawless, so flawless that when guests visited, they praised their hospitality, saying, "You're lucky to have such a responsible daughter in law." She would smile and reply, "It's all God's grace." But behind that grace was something much darker, a quiet hunger for power, a hunger that would soon claim its first victim. Because Jolly had learned one dangerous truth early in life. If you can control what people believe, you can control everything. It began, as all tragedies do, quietly. The year was 2002. Life in the Ponnamattam house flowed as it always had. Prayers at dawn, neighbors visiting, the smell of freshly grounded coffee filling the air. At the center of that home stood Annamma Thomas, who was Jolly's mother in law, a kind, deeply religious, and respected woman in the community. She treated Jolly like her own daughter, and for a time, Jolly played that role perfectly. But beneath the daily routine, something dangerous had already begun to take shape. Jolly was growing restless. Her husband Roy's income wasn't enough to match her ambition. She wanted more money, more authority, and more admiration. But as long as Annamma was alive, the power in the house didn't belong to Jolly. Every major decision, it might be property, family matters, finances, it all went through Annamma. And that was something Jolly couldn't control. So she began to plan. No one knows exactly what the thought first entered her mind, but when it did, it refused to leave. Jolly heard how cyanide, a deadly chemical used by goldsmiths, could kill silently and swiftly. There would be no smell, no trace, no noise, and death just within minutes. And that's the perfect disguise, a natural heart attack. Jolly's plan was simple, yet cruelly brilliant. On a morning like any other, Anima prepared for her routine coffee. Jolly offered to make it for her. Minutes later, Anima took her first sip. The taste was the same as always, but within moments, her breathing flattered, her body stiffed, then absolute silence. Panic spread to house. Family members rushed in. Jolly screamed, called for help, played the role of the horrifying daughter in law flawlessly. The daughter later declared it a heart attack. The funeral was held next day. Jolly was the first to arrive, dressed in white, weeping quietly, holding everyone's hand and saying, "God takes only the good ones early." People praised her strength, her calmness. She became the emotional anchor of the family. No one questioned her. But deep inside, Jolly felt something new. Not guilt, not fear, but the power she wanted. Now she had crossed that line and survived it. She had taken a life, watched everyone trust her even more, and realized something terrifying. Killing, when done perfectly, doesn't make you weaker, it makes you untouchable. And for Jolly Joseph, that feeling was intoxicating. After Anama's death, life at the Ponnamattam house slowly returned to normal. The prayers continued, the guests kept coming, the smell of her coffee never left the kitchen, and Jolly, she became the family's center of gravity. Now she managed the house, controlled the finances, and carried the image of a woman who had seen tragedy but still stood strong. People in the village adored her. To them, she was the perfect daughter in law who is unshakable, selfless, and kind. But inside her mind, something irreversible had changed. She had tasted what it meant to hold power over life and death. And the fear that should have stopped her never came. So the second death was in the year 2008. 6 years later, another morning, another cup of coffee. This time, it was a father in law, Tom Thomas. Tom was aging, he was gentle and trusted Jolly completely. She served him coffee just as she did. Moments later, he began to choke and collapse in his chair. Panic again, doctor again, diagnosis again. The result was same, cardiac arrest. And again, Jolly stood by the coffin, tears rolling down her cheek, whispering, "He loved me like his own daughter." But behind those tears was calculation. With Tom gone, Jolly now had full control of the Ponnamattam house and the family's property. Two deaths, both ruled natural. Rather, we can say two murders, both invisible. And by the year 2011, the third death came. By now, her husband Roy Thomas has started to suspect that his wife wasn't who she seemed. He had found inconsistencies in her stories about work. The lecturer at NIT Calicut story was falling apart. He confronted her. Arguments followed. Roy began drinking more, becoming unstable. For Jolly, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a threat. She needed Roy out of her way. So on June 2nd, 2011, Roy was found dead in the same house, an apartment suicide. A note was discovered, written in a shaky handwriting, claiming he couldn't handle life anymore. But the handwriting was forged. Jolly had mixed cyanide into his food, once again supplied through her contact in the local jewelry trade. After the autopsy, authorities noted traces of poison, but the investigation was sloppy, inconclusive, and the case was closed. Another funeral, another brilliant performance. At Roy's coffin, she sloped, saying, "He couldn't take the pressure. I tried everything." And people believed her. Now, she was not just a grieving widow. She was the woman who had lost her husband, her father-in-law and mother-in-law, yet still smiled through the pain. A living symbol of strength, isn't it? And she enjoyed every second of that image. Then comes the fourth in the year 2014. By now, greed wasn't just a motive, it was a routine. She forged property documents in her name, expanded her control, and began isolating distant relatives who questioned her. The next victim was Matthew, a relative who had started doubting her stories about property inheritance. He too died suddenly after consuming food at her home. Cause of death unknown. The fifth and the sixth was in the year 2016. By now, even Jolly's mask was beginning to crack, but not enough for anyone to see through her. The final victim were Alpine, the 2-year-old daughter of her husband's cousin, and Silsey, the child's mother. The death came just months apart. Both were sudden. Both had the same symptoms, such as dizziness, vomiting, collapse, and finally cardiac arrest. Both had Jolly nearby. Silsey's death shook the family. But by then, tragedy had become almost normal around Jolly. People said the house is cursed. No one ever said the woman is cursed. Between 2002 and 2016, six people, all connected by blood and trust, died mysteriously around one woman, Jolly. Each death was meticulously planned, each funeral strengthened her reputation, each tear she shed gave her more control. Psychologists later called it the calm of narcissistic psychopath, a person who kills not for pleasure but for convenience. And for nearly 2 decades, Jolly lived among the dead, pretending to mourn them. But every story built on lies eventually cracks, isn't it? And hers was about to break wide open. By 2017, the house that once overflowed with laughter and life had become extremely silent. The Ponnamatam house now belonged to almost entirely one person, that is, Jolly Jospeh. Six people gone, one woman standing, two outsiders. She was still the same, calm, composed, occasionally visiting church, speaking politely to the neighbors. But to those who looked closer, something felt off. First, a brother's doubt. Far away in Gulf, Rojo Thomas, Roy's younger brother, was haunted by the past. Every time he visited home, the pattern of the tragedy seemed stranger. First their parents, then Roy, then relatives. At first, he dismissed it as fate. Kerala's small towns often attribute such streak to destiny. But the unease wouldn't go away. One night, while going through family documents, Rojo noticed something odd, a will that seemed freshly printed, signature that didn't look right, and property papers now showing Jolly's name where his parents once were. Then the discovery that changed everything. A certificate claiming Jolly was a lecturer at the National Institute of Technology, Calicut. Rojo checked with the institution. They had no record of any Jolly Jospeh. The perfect image now had a crack. As whispers grew, Jolly tried to tighten control. She avoided family meetings, gave short answers, and avoided questions about property or Roy's death. But paranoia had started to take hold. She sensed eyes on her, from neighbors, from relatives, even from churchgoers who once adored her. Still, she played her part, smiling politely, attending functions, pretending nothing had changed. But every lie had begun to demand energy to maintain, and Jolly was running out of it. Rojo confronted her over the phone, demanding explanation. She dismissed him, saying, "You're imagining things, you don't understand this family." But Rojo did understand one thing: if something felt wrong for this long, then this is absolutely wrong. In 2016, the death of Cillian Alpine, the mother and child, had already pushed the family's patience to the edge. 2 generations dying within months, even the most faithful began to question faith. When Rojo returned home in 2018, he decided to act. He filed a formal complaint with the police, questioning a deeper investigation into Roy's mysterious death. It was a small action, but it set off a chain reaction that would unravel the 17 years of the murder. For months, the case stayed cold. Then in 2019, a police team reopened it. They began cross verifying autopsy reports, death certificates, and family testimonies. They noticed something the earlier officers hadn't. All the 6 deaths were linked to one woman and all shared similar symptoms. And that was enough for the police to dig deeper. They ordered exhumation of the bodies for re examination. And as police trucks arrived at the burial ground, Jolly's calmness began to crack for the first time. She smiled, but this wasn't the same smile anymore. Because deep down she knew the dead were finally coming back to speak. The morning of October 4th, 2019 began like any other. The air was still, the church bells echoed faintly across the coconut field. But at the cemetery near St. Laura's Church, something extraordinary was happening. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, graves were being opened. Police officers, forensic experts, and doctors stood around 6 burial sites, each belonging to a member of the same family, the Ponnamatams. Their death had always been tragic. Now, police were about to learn they were also calculated. As the bodies were exhumed one after another, officers collected samples from bone and hair, meticulously sealed, carefully numbered. These remains were sent to the forensic lab in Thiruvananthapuram. Weeks later, the result arrived. The test confirmed traces of cyanide in multiple victims: Anama, Tom, Roy, and others. The same deadly chemical, the same slow, silent killer. The pattern was undeniable. The killer was unmistakable. So on October 5th, 2019, police vehicles rolled into the Ponnamatam house. Officers surrounded the quiet house where Jolly sat reading the newspaper, sipping tea. When they asked her to step out, she didn't resist. She simply adjusted dupatta, locked the door behind her, and simply said, "I know why you're here." Her calmness unsettled even the officers. There was no panic, no denial. Only that same composed face she had worn at every funeral. By the evening, every news channel in Kerala screamed the same headlines: Jolly Jospeh arrested, the cyanide killer of Kerala. During the interrogation, Jolly's mask finally came off, but not in a way the police expected. She didn't cry, she didn't tremble. She spoke clearly, precisely, as if reciting a well practiced story. She confessed to the murders, explaining how she used the potassium cyanide, obtaining through a friend Matthew, a local goldsmith. She described how she mixed it in coffee, water, and food. Now she made sure to serve the poison potion to herself. When asked why, she said, "I only wanted peace in the family." But actually, her version of peace was power. Psychologists who studied her case later described her as exhibiting high functioning psychopath, where she is emotionally detached, manipulative, and narcissist. She didn't kill out of rage or depression, she killed to maintain power. Each death wasn't a crisis, it was a solution. Each funeral wasn't a grief for Jolly, it was a victory. Even after a confession, Jolly tried to twist the narrative, telling officers she had been framed, retracting statements, playing victim again. But the evidence was overwhelming. The cyanide traces, forged signature, fake job IDs, property transfers. For the people of Kerala, the realization hit like thunder. For 17 years, a smiling woman had lived among them, attending church, hosting family dinners, babysitting children, while secretly poisoning her own family. The story shattered the image of what a killer looks like. No anger, no chaos, just calm precision. To this day, her trial continues. But one thing is certain: the woman once seen as a symbol of grace and devotion is now etched in India's criminal history as the cyanide killer. This story wasn't about a revenge, or passion, or impulsive. This was a story about control. A woman who wanted the world to see her as perfect, even if it meant burying everyone who stood in her way. Her victim trusted her, loved her, believed her tears were real. And that is what makes the story terrifying. Because evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks kind, sometimes it smiles, sometimes it serves you coffee. This was the story of Jolly Jospeh, the cyanide killer of Kerala. And that's it for today. I'm Sai from SPK Reports, unmasking crime one story at a time.